My name is Viktor Kidson, and welcome to the first installment of Live. And today's guest is none other than Steve Helstrip. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, mate. It's been a very long day, but yeah, it's good to be here with you and good to see you again, mate. How have you been?
Good to see you as well. I've been really good. I've been really busy. I'm in Australia, you're in the UK, so it's a bit early here and it's a bit late where you are.
It is, yeah, but it's all good.
It is all good. You're known as the Thrillseekers, obviously, but you're also known as Hydra. And I've been wanting to talk to you about the Hydra album for quite some time now, actually. And it was just released a couple of days ago. How do you feel?
It feels great to finally get it out because we talked, of course, a couple of years ago when this was just beginning as an idea. And as you know, I think the original schedule was to kind of have it wrapped up within a year and it didn't quite go to plan. So to have it out is great and the reception seems to be going well so far. So yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, good.
You sent me the album a couple of days ago before the release and I haven't been able to stop listening to it. It is a fantastic album. But before we go into the Hydra album itself, I just wanted to take a step back to Affinity. Hydra Affinity, 2003. Yeah. How come you wanted to create an alias back then?
I think the main reason was back then, the way music was marketed was very different. Of course, we were sending records to DJs and the way it works back then was you'd give your record to maybe 5 or 6 DJs. So in this instance, maybe a copy to Paul van Dyk, Paul Oakenfold, all the Pauls, Paul Oakenfold perhaps. And you'd let them kind of just have that exclusively for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 months. And then you'd give it to another 6 DJs and slowly would roll this out. And back in the early 2000s, I was very prolific with making music and doing remixes under various names and aliases because it was impossible to put out more than like maybe 2 or 3 tracks at a time. So rather than having 3 or 4 Thrillseekers tracks all land at the same time, I came up with different aliases to allow me to have an output for my music. And that's the reason why, really.
What can you tell me about the Hydra sound in Affinity? Do you remember your original idea to the Hydra sound back then?
I do, yeah. Well, I remember sitting down with a keyboard, which is just to my left here, actually, the Nord lead. And it was just a nice, soft, plucky sound, which had a really nice kind of warm feeling to it. And I kind of just sat down and played this melody very quickly. It came together very quick, very organically. And it was a much softer, progressive kind of sound, much softer kicks. I really put a lot of effort into making just sounding warm and a lovely vocal. And simple as well, which was a little bit more, it was definitely different to the Thrillseekers sound. So that's kind of how it started. And the vision since then is to kind of go back and keep it kind of softer, more mellow. Of course, the last single was Amber. And that kind of followed with the same kind of plucky sounds and the big lush reverbs and the strings. And that hopefully explains a bit of it. So.
A little bit, yes. What's interesting is like the name Altered State for the new Hydra album, because even back in 2003 and even now when I listen to Affinity, it kind of does something to my mind and it kind of takes me away. And as I've been listening to the album, because you told me the album is Gapless, just tell us a little bit about what that means.
Well, the Gapless side of things is that some of the tracks kind of flow into each other. So it's not a DJ mix as such, but the tracks were written so that one track flows into the next and they mix harmonically. And on the CD version, there were 2 discs because there was just too much music to fit onto one. I did a lot of editing to try and make it fit onto one. And it just wasn't working. And the original Hydra concept was to not follow any set like structure or progression, but to just let the music flow, tell a story. And some of the tracks started out as maybe 15-minute versions, and I did my best to get them down to 9-10 minutes, and I was successful in most cases. But again, I wasn't able to I didn't want to bring the tracks down to 5-6 minutes like a lot of tracks are these days. I wanted to let the tracks run out and really, tell a story along the way. Because when I started getting into trance in 98, 99, a lot of the tracks, it was quite normal for trance to be, 13 minutes. It wasn't unusual for a Sasha and Digweed track to be that long. It was just normal. They told a story. They had their own unique sound and identity. And that's what I really tried to do with Hydra, was to go back to the storytelling and not having the set structure and having surprises along the way. Did that answer some of your question?
It did. And I love that approach. I love that idea that you take where you come from pretty much, and then you just put it into an album and you do it your way. Completely your way. Because when I listen to Altered State, I put it on and I'm not sure which tracks I'm listening to because everything flows so well, but I know something happens. I'm just looking at the track list right now, around track number 4, or with track number 4, All That Matters. For me, the next 3-4 tracks are just together in a beautiful symphony. But what can you tell me about track number 4? Because I hear that's very, very special to you.
All That Matters, yeah, I think I touch on the story behind that in the album notes. The story, I mean, all the tracks on the album have some meaning, because for me, my best music always has some inspiration, and those come from big life-changing moments or something that really touches or moves me. And with All That Matters, the story was that this story goes back 25 years, and I used to work in a recording studio in Oxford, and my family were back living in York, which was 3 or 4 hours away. And it was the summer holidays, and my younger brother, Rich, who later went on to become Free Radical, he came to stay with me for a week in the studio. I gave my parents a break, and we got to hang out for the week. And he was only about 10 years old at this time, so I was looking after him as the big brother. And one day we came to wrapping up the session in the studio, and we got into my friend's car to go to his house to have dinner. And I remember we got sat down in the car, and he was sat in the back, and I was very insistent that he should put his seatbelt on, and he was giving me a little bit of attitude, as young kids do, and he wouldn't put his seatbelt on. I remember getting really kind of wound up. I almost ended up screaming at him to put his seatbelt on, and this took me by surprise. It was very unusual for me to, be like that. But anyway, to long story short, 10 minutes into the journey, a deer ran out across in front of the car, and the driver swerved to miss this deer in the car. Basically, he lost control of the car, and we were rolling down this country lane, and we ended up upside down at the side of the road in a ditch with all the windows were broken, and it was just the most shocking experience. And all I could think at that moment was, we need to get out of the car. What if the car catches fire? So I was screaming at my brother to get out of the car, get out, get out. And we managed to climb out of the car through the window. And between the three of us, miraculously, there wasn't a single scratch between any of us. It was just the most amazing thing. But the car was completely written off. And my friend was worried about his car. I was like, oh no. I said, look, we're all safe. Everything's fine. That's all that matters. And the next day, I just couldn't compute what had happened, how close we came to, a tragedy. And if I hadn't have been so insistent that my brother put his seatbelt on, he may not be with us anymore. The only way I could come to terms with it was to sit down at the keyboard, and I played this melody, which I didn't record at the time, but it stayed in my head the whole time. And when I came to make this album, the melody was just there, and I thought, I'm going to try this as an idea for a Hydra track. So I pulled up the pluck sound that I associate with that sound, and that became the track All That Matters. And those kind of life-changing moments I try to put into a piece of music, to almost as therapy for myself, if you like. So yeah, that's the story behind that one.
I love that story. It's it's a very powerful story, and the track is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And then again, what happens with the tracks after that? Everything for me is just one big beautiful symphony of amazingness. When we spoke a couple of years ago, you kind of described the sound as lush, and I think that's the best way to describe it. How do you look at that?
I think as a producer, that's what really draws me into the trance sound, the feelings that trance evokes, both through the melody and the chord structure, but also the sounds themselves. And that's what really attracts me to the genre and the sound. And, over my career, I've really tried to hone that sound. And, a lot of the inspiration comes from artists like Chicane that have inspired me back in the early days. And taking that sound and developing it with my own unique way of doing things. So Lush is very much in the forefront of my mind when I'm making these tracks to make things sound as luxurious as possible. So hopefully we did all right with this one.
It's fantastic, and this might be a little bit hard to talk about or to explain, but when I listen to the album, my mind kind of wanders, and I really feel affected by the music. How did you work with that when you produced it?
Well, it's kind of going back to the name of the album, Altered State. I mean, on one level, I've always been fascinated with how a piece of music can change your state of mind. And, if a track is very down-tempo, melancholic, it can make you feel sad, it can make you feel uplifted, it can make you feel sorrow, it can make you feel joy, So, and I've always been fascinated with how music can do that. So the Altered State kind of idea came into play with on one level we have club music, and on another level we have the ambient music, and I wanted the two to work alongside each other, and for me to be able to take the themes and melodies from the club music and put them into an ambient piece, so that when you're listening to both discs, although it's the same music you're listening to, your head is in a very different place. And that was kind of one of the concepts behind the album.
I sent you a message during your album production process, and I asked how you were going, and you said, "I'm going well. I just need to do an ambient version of the tracks now."
Just an ambient version.
What can you tell me about the ambient version, like where oceans meet?
It's quite a complex piece. It was one of the most ambitious productions I've undertaken, I think, because originally when we spoke 2 years ago, the idea was really to strip away the beats from the club tracks. And when you do that, you're left really with an ambient track. And then I was thinking about it more, and I was kind of making the connection with 2 or 3 different tracks and realizing that the chord structures are often very similar, because that kind of defines trance as a genre. And the melodies that I have used for this album almost work with each other. So I can interchange melodies over the similar chord structures, and they fit. So I kind of decided to approach the ambient side differently and take melodies, or the main melodies from the club tracks, and treat them almost as just parts within one bigger track. So the second disc is called Where Oceans Meet, but it breaks down into 5 parts. And it starts with one melody from one track, and in the background there'll be a part from another track. And the themes come and go throughout the 24-minute journey. The melodies may be playing on a different sound, a different instrument, or they may be playing at half tempo. And the parts which play through the entire 24 minutes subliminally at some level. And to work on such a big project was quite a mission, because I was working with somewhere between 250 tracks on my screen, which was quite a challenge for my head, just to get my head around it all. But it enabled me to really, play with all the sounds and come up with something quite unique. So hopefully it comes across well. We'll see.
No, I've been listening to that piece a lot as well, and I know people are going to love it because I'm just blown away by it. What can you tell me about the name, like Where Oceans Meet, and the concept for that?
It's a lot of the inspiration for the ambient side of the album came from, like I said earlier, for me, my best music comes when there's something inside that I need to express, or something really moves me. It could be a life experience, or just something that I've seen on TV, or something that's happening in the world. And over the past kind of 20 years, I was kind of looking back over my career, and one of the biggest changes I've seen in life is just the way that people are treating the planet, and we're looking at climate change and plastic in the oceans, and those images that I see on the news really kind of move me, and I wanted to try and get that out in a piece of music. So that was a lot of the inspiration for the ambient side. So on one level we have the altered state of mind, listening to the club and the ambient mixes, but we've also got the influence from the changing state of the planet. So we've got the different altering states. And then I started thinking about, how can we go deeper with this? So towards the end of the album, there's a moment at the very end called Pincer Moments, which is a moment to just sit and pause and take in the music. And then I was bringing in the innocence of childhood which children are going to be the ones that are going to be most affected by the altering state of the planet, if you like. And I remembered I had these. I went into a school a very long time ago with a tape recorder, and I recorded the children singing, and I kind of placed this ambient soundscape from a school at the end of the album on this track called Pinter Moments. And it kind of works really well. It's kind of a haunting but very poignant moment on the album. So you'll hear that at the end of the track. And the other bonus as well is that when you get to the end of the album on Spotify, you're not just hit with another random track that kicks into play. You're going to have this 25 seconds to just listen to the ocean waves and these children just singing in the background, which for me, I thought was a nice touch.
It is a good thing because Spotify throws in all kinds of stuff. So you get a, a quiet moment to leave that and then go into the next thing. Or play Altered State again, obviously, because that's what I do.
Well, it depends how much you like it.
Where does the name come from, like where oceans meet?
Again, I was actually watching a program. I can't remember who it was by, but it was looking at all the oceans and what's going on with the wildlife. And I think it was mentioned something like where the oceans meet. And I thought that was a really thought-provoking kind of inspiration. I thought, that's a great title for a track. And I thought, well, how about I treat the individual melodies like an ocean so that they can swim into each other. And I thought, well, this could work with the concept of the album. So the melodies, like I described earlier, they kind of come and go throughout the entire 24-minute piece. And it's almost like, it's an apocalyptic view, I know, but, should things go terribly in the coming 50 years or so, the oceans will meet, but at the same time, the music as well will meet and try to depict that story. And that's just because I felt passionately about these images that I've seen on TV and everybody's seen. And that's what I put into the music.
Again, I think it's fantastic. You mentioned that we talked about this 1 or 2 years ago, the album, and it took a little bit longer than you thought it would take. The album process, the production process. What can you tell me about that?
It did indeed, and if there's one thing I've learned from this entire process is that I shouldn't announce projects before they're finished, so big learning lesson for me. I mean, basically, like, we met in Switzerland at the Zurich Street Parade, and the idea was to produce this album within a year time frame. And unfortunately, into that kind of process, my hearing took a little bit of a hit. And that was just a cumulative damage from, being in loud nightclubs and working in the studio for, all of my working life, basically. And I kind of got to a point where my hearing became so sensitive to some frequencies that it was painful for me to be in the studio for more than maybe an hour at a time. So the only way to kind of move forward was to rest my ears, which was like a 6-month process. So that kind of took out a big chunk of my production schedule. And, I felt a lot of guilt that I'd kind of, we'd promoted this album and we got a lot of backing from customers on Amplified to, raise the money to make this happen. And a lot of people had backed this project buying, CDs and vinyl and T-shirts and all these packages that we did on Amplified that they'd, backed. So massive, huge thanks to everybody that believed in that project. So at the end of the first year, I wasn't quite at a place where I was ready to release the album, and I had to, basically be honest with everybody and say, look, this is what's happened. I need to rest my ears. And everyone was so supportive, and, that's a wonderful feeling to have that support from the community. And that's what I love about the trans community. They are very supportive. So here we are 2 years later. My hearing's back to being, it's never going to be perfect again, but I can certainly work in the studio fine now, so long as I don't have the volume too too high. But you know how it is. I think loud music is pretty much universally liked, but of course you need to be very careful.
Yeah, you should definitely be very careful. I'm happy you're feeling better right now, though.
Yeah. What? Sorry. Sorry, I had to do that, didn't I?
In the beginning of the booklet, you thank your wife and your kids.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about that. How has it been the last couple of months or even years?
It's just been hectic. One of the ideas for this album was not only to do this project on my own label and fund it through crowdfunding on Amplified, So that was one of the main driving things. But I didn't underestimate the work involved, but it kind of became a little bit overwhelming towards the end, because on top of the production process and, working to a deadline, it was going to be one CD, and then it was two, and then I had all these tracks, and I was working, I did the artwork myself. That was completely unplanned. I was just doodling, and I quite liked what I'd done. And then I'm working on the distribution and the t-shirt designs, and how do we get it manufactured, and how do we market this, and working on dates. I was literally doing everything myself. So for the last 4 or 5 months, honestly, 12 hours a day in here was normal, 18 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week. So I literally never saw my family for, the last 4 or 5 months. So I had to just, start the thank yous with, to my family for putting up with me, basically, because without them, I would not be able to do this. So.
What has it been like to be the distributor, to be the designer, to be that person? Because you're in full control of everything, right?
Yeah, I don't think I'd do it again. But it's, I've had I started my label Adjusted Music back in 2002, I think. And the whole purpose of that was to gain control of my own music, because back in the early days, let's say, a lot of the music that I signed was mismanaged, and I never I lost control, and I got ripped off by a lot of record labels. So I was like, I've had enough of that. I'm just going to do it on my own. So I've been used to running a label, but with the time pressures that this album put on me, it all got a bit too much. But it's done now, so I can breathe and relax.
Do you have a CD? Do you have a CD right next to you right now?
I can certainly find them. Bear with me.
How do you feel holding up the finished product right now?
It feels good. It feels really good to know that it's done. If we open up the booklet in here, this is a list of thank yous to all the people that supported this on Amplified. So I think there were maybe about 600 people that bought the CD or the vinyl, or I did lots of packages such as, meet and greet, VIP packages to come to gigs. There was a package to join a private Facebook group and watch me produce music in the studio. So I would, stream for an hour, and I'd have 2 cameras, and I'd share the screen with, music producers that, bought this package. So to actually finally have the finished product is amazing. And a lot of people have been in touch with me that have bought the CD and just wanted to thank me for, being part of their life musically for the past 20 years. And they just wanted to support me. They said, some people have said, don't even bother sending the CD and the vinyl. I just wanted to, say thank you in a way. That's really, really touching. So it's great to have that support.
In a couple of months, you're coming to Australia, and I'm definitely buying at least 1 or 2 CDs. And I would love if you could sign them for me as well, because
it'll be my pleasure, of course.
Album of the year, no doubt. Already.
You're too kind.
What else is in the future for Hydra right now?
Do you know what? I don't think I need anything else in the future. I just want to just take a breather now. Of course, we're coming up to Christmas, so I intentionally have no gigs until New Year's Eve now, so I can just 3 or 4 weeks. I've had no gigs for the past month. I knew that this was going to be a very intense time for me, so I purposely didn't take any gigs. January is often very quiet anyway, and then once February comes around, it's touring mayhem. So I'm going to be every weekend in February, March, April. So in fact, this New Year's Eve actually, I do have a very interesting gig here in Manchester, and I'm going to be playing with Sam Mitchum, who many of you will know. If you don't know Sam Mitchum, he was one of the residents at God's Kitchen, so a fantastic DJ, both technically, and his music is great as well. So we're going to go back to back, open to close, and it's vinyl only. So we're going to play for 7 hours minimum. So we'll start at 10 o'clock in the evening and go till 5. If people want to keep going, we can. So that's going to be great. So that's New Year's Eve in Manchester. So that's my next gig. So I'm really looking forward to that. I have some decks over here. So they'll be getting some abuse over the coming weeks, just for fun though. So it's going to be good fun.
It sounds like a great gig to come back to after a bit of a break as well.
Yeah, it will, because we're going to, I think we'll play like an hour each in the opening hours, and then play back to back for a couple of hours, and then maybe an hour each again. We'll just play it by ear.
Will you play the Hydra vinyl?
I do have the Hydra vinyl. I have the test pressing. I can show you 1 second. Here we go. So, so we have the test pressings of the vinyl. So the actual release. Let me show you this. So we have. You can see,
oh wow!
So these are the test pressings. The vinyl was due to be delivered to me a week ago, the finished product, but there was problems with the initial test pressing, and I wasn't happy with the quality, so I had to have, I said to the pressing plant, well, you need to do this again because I'm not happy, and this delayed the actual manufacturing process, and with Christmas coming up, I won't actually have the finished vinyl, but I do have this, which I can play on New Year's Eve if the mood takes me at the time.
Well, I'm happy you have that, and I'm happy the vinyls are coming as well.
Yes, they are, yeah. So they'll be shipping out in the second week of January.
So will you get all the vinyls and all the CDs to your house and
they're
you
all
pack
coming
them
here.
and set them out?
Everything came here. Me and my daughters have kind of, taken all the cellophane off, 500 copies to sign, and we've packaged them out and sent them off along with postcards and stickers, and we're going to be doing the same for the vinyl once they arrive in January. So it has been like an Amazon warehouse here the past few weeks, but it's done now. All the CDs are out. T-shirts have gone, pretty much sold out. So yeah, it's been good.
I'm happy that you're in control of everything. I understand that it's a lot of work though, but...
yeah, not kidding.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for taking the time to do this. It's good.
How did you feel for the album release, like the day before?
Well, it's still very early days, so I know you play your music to your closest friends and people in the industry, and they give you their feedback. But it's not really until the music is out amongst the masses that you start to get the real feedback. So it's still early days. But I've had some great reviews. I've had a guest mix on Above and Beyond's radio show. I've done State of Trance with Armin, and the feedback that I've seen there has been fantastic. So that's, it's great and feels like it's all been worthwhile. So, but time will tell. It's still early days. So guys, go check it out and let me know what you think.
Well, and to be honest, I'm excited to be listening to this more because I keep hearing new things on the album as well. New sounds, new soundscapes.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was a teenager listening to Depeche Mode, I think everybody goes through this process where you listen to music on the surface and you connect with the melody or the feeling or the message or the lyric, whatever it is. And then you listen to it more and more, and then you start to pick up on little things that you haven't necessarily heard before. And, I kind of twigged this in my teenage years. And, as I produce now, I try to put things in very subtly in the music that you're not going to hear on the first play. You're not going to hear on the 5th play or maybe the 12th play. But many, many plays in, you're going to find little things that you do hear. And my production process is very intricate. I have many, many, hundreds of tracks sometimes. A lot of producers work with 15, 16 tracks and their music is amazing. But what I do is more... intricate, and a lot of it just washes over most people, but when you do listen to it, there's a lot more in there to discover, I hope, or that's my intention anyway.
What would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from producing this Hydra album and the way you did it?
I think I touched on it earlier, and that would be to not announce something until it's actually physically done in your hands, because in fact, it's a double-edged sword, really. The fact that I had announced it way before I'd produced it put a pressure on me to get it done. I didn't like that pressure. It felt, unnatural to be up against, a false deadline. It wasn't a false deadline, but a meaningless deadline. But at the same time, it kind of pushed me to get it done as well. So, but I think next time, deadlines are good for me. The stress of a deadline makes me work. But yeah, I definitely won't announce something until it's done next time. But that's the biggest lesson I've learned.
Thank you so much for your time, for taking the time to talk to me about the Hydra Altered State album. And thank you for making it as well. It's absolutely gorgeous.
You're too kind. So, I'll get to see you in February, I believe, in Sydney. So yes. I look forward to that.
I'm coming for my CD as well.
Okay, and hopefully I'll have a vinyl for you as well.
Thank you. I can't wait to see you, man. And thank you for this time as well.